Hey, folks, it's David Jones. Everyone calls me Jonesy, so feel free as we get started here today. It is that time. It is time for another session of Getting to Know Dynatrace. And so, as always with these Getting to Know Dynatrace sessions, what makes them so interesting and so impactful and so much fun for us to do are the questions that you ask us as we are going through a demonstration. Today, we've got Brendan Steiner back with us to do a demonstration. Hey, Brendan, how you doing? Oh, not sure we got your audio working there.
There we go. How about now?
Now we got it.
Okay.
Perfect.
Now I'm good, Jonesy. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. So let's get into our regularly scheduled program, Getting to Know Dynatrace Cloud Done Right. And as always with Getting to Know Dynatrace, we have a couple of upfront segments that we would like to walk through, and then we're going to hand things over to Brendan to do a demonstration. So let's get started here. And the first segment is always what's new. And so, where is the easiest place for you to find out what's new at Dynatrace? It is, of course, the Dynatrace blog. So, I invite you to go to dynatrace.com/news/blog, and you'll be able to see all of the different interesting things that are going on at Dynatrace. We just recently posted an article about a new CVE or a new vulnerability that had been issued around Apache Commons text. Now, it's a really interesting one where it is, pretty serious, but it's not nearly as bad as the Log4j issue that happened last year around Christmas time. That one last holiday season really was an interesting one that really impacted a lot of organizations. But the fact that this one here is utilizing the Apache Commons framework, it is of concern. So, we wrote a blog article about it. Please go to the blog site, give that blog article a read, walk through it, understand it a little bit better. It'll give you some details in terms of what, how you can use the Dynatrace vulnerability detection capabilities to actually understand if, in fact, you are being impacted or affected by this vulnerability. Like I said, it's not as bad as the Log4j one, but it's definitely something that you want to be aware of. And then also on the blog, there's a couple of other articles around some of the release notes about newer versions of the Dynatrace One agent that have been released. There's some interesting blog articles on how to apply real world AI ops to your operations. And, obviously, we're continuing this discussion around the big announcement that we made several weeks ago around the Dynatrace Grail technology. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that at a later date. So definitely, if you want to find out what's new, what's going on here at Dynatrace, go to the blog site, give some of these articles a read. So the next segment is, did you know? And so since we were just talking about that vulnerability and that blog article about that vulnerability, did you know that Dynatrace provides observability-driven AppSec? What do I mean by observability-driven AppSec? So one of the capabilities of the Dynatrace platform is its ability to detect vulnerabilities that have been, seen within your applications and your application code. So this is something that the one agent does by itself. It's literally you flip a switch, you can turn on this functionality, and it will go out and it will automatically detect if there are any known vulnerabilities that are being seen within your deployment. We use a feed that comes from a third-party source called SNCC or Sneak, depending upon how you like to pronounce that kind of thing. And we basically take this feed, and in real time, we will actually be able to determine whether or not any of those vulnerabilities from that feed are showing up within your code base, within your applications. This is very different than traditional, sort of network or application scanning type technologies. Scanning type technologies, they're kind of useful, but the problem with them is that once you've done the scan, if a change gets made to your application, if a change gets made to your environment, then that scan is no longer relevant. And so, one of the things that we've done to really sort of fill in the gaps around those scanning type tools is by providing this always on, near real time capability for vulnerability detection. And this fall, we've enhanced it. We've actually added a capability that allows us not only to determine a vulnerability, but we also have the capability of being able to block an attack. Now, I'm going to take a moment. I don't usually do this during these segments. I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to bring up a different window, just sort of walk you through an example of what this looks like. So I've gone into a Dynatrace instance where we've turned on the vulnerability detection and we've turned on this attack blocking capability, just to sort of give you an idea as to what it will look like. This is currently in preview for our customers. So if you are a customer, we have customers right now that are, testing this out. Basically it's a sort of a, by invitation preview mode. And what they're seeing now is an interface that looks ultimately kind of like this, where we actually can see if there are any attacks that we've witnessed within, whatever the time frame is that we're looking at, how many of those have been blocked, how many of them have been whitelisted, because maybe the attack is actually as a result of some proactive pen testing that you might be doing. So rather than getting in the way of that pen test, what you can do is you can whitelist that penetration test. And so that allows that pen test to execute and perhaps try to exploit a vulnerability. But if you're using this in production, more often than not, what you will want to do is if you are seeing an attack that's coming across from an external malicious actor, you're going to want to block those attacks. And Dynatrace is going to track where those attacks are coming from. And then we'll be able to determine the nature of the attack. Is the attack something like a JNDI injection? Is it a SQL injection? Several weeks ago, I had one of our specialists, Susan, walk me through a demonstration as to how you actually execute a JNDI attack. I have to admit that when she showed it to me, I kind of had an existential crisis moment because I did not realize just how easy it is to, exercise one of these exploits. It was one of those things where it was a real humbling moment. And so because these JNDI attacks and these SQL injection attacks are so simple to in fact actually execute, the need for having this visibility, it really impressed me as to how important it is. So when we see one of these attacks, I can go in, I can look at some details about this, I can go into the specific attack details here, and what we can determine is where that attack is coming from. So we can see the source IP. We can see the entry point where that attack is coming in from. So this is essentially the web request that's being used for this exploit. We can then determine what the vulnerability is in terms of, what are they looking to exploit? And we can see ultimately the end target machine that they're looking to attack. Here, we provide details about the entry point. We provide details about what vulnerability is in fact actually being exploited. You can always click back here to see the vulnerability details. You can then, from that vulnerability details, understand what are some of the other components? What are the data assets that are potentially at risk because of this exploit? Down below here, you can see that we're tracking the logs. This ties in very nicely with the Grail announcement that we made several weeks ago. This is just showing you how the integration of this attack vulnerability detection, your logs, this is all going to be a critical piece of you ensuring that your applications are well protected. And then down below here, we can see more about the request that was being used. Here we can actually see the HTTP headers. We can see the attacker details in terms of where the attacker is coming from. More importantly, when we block this attack, so if we actually set this up to block this type of attack, what's really interesting about this approach is that it's not going to affect your application in production. So it's not going to take down a service. It's not going to take down a process or anything like that. What's going to happen is the attacker, when they make this attack, we do something very interesting. And I have to say that I think that our approach is really elegant. And that is that when the attacker, in this particular case, is making a request to, they're executing a request. Here's the request that they're looking to execute. What we're in fact doing is we're seeing that inbound request. We're seeing that it's a vulnerability. We know that it's an attack. And then what we do is we just fail that request. So that allows us to basically do this in a production scenario without really impacting the overall nature of that production application. We're just simply blocking that attack by failing that request. We're generating an exception so that attacker simply can't do anything. But now we have details about that attacker. We know how they tried to get at us. We know where they're coming from. So that information allows your security teams to really focus in on, those malicious actors that are trying to get around things to, execute one, and exploit one of these vulnerabilities. So something interesting. Not sure if everyone was aware of that, but definitely this is something that we wanted you to know about, given this recent sort of announcement about that vulnerability. So let's get back to our presentation here. Oh, no, right here. And the couple more things before we get into the demonstration. First thing is a reminder that Dynatrace Perform, the next one, is going to be held in Las Vegas, February 13th to 16th at the fabulous Cosmopolitan Hotel. It's a great venue. I can't recommend Dynatrace Perform enough. One of the things that I really, really, really want to recommend is if you are planning on attending, if you're planning to attend one of the hot day sessions, the hands-on training sessions, sign up soon. Those classes fill up. And when they fill up, there's no room for us to expand them and add people to those classes. So if you're thinking about going to Dynatrace Perform and you're thinking about doing one of the hot day sessions, which are quite honestly amazing, typically 3-hour sessions where you just literally get hands-on with some Dynatrace experts walking through how you use Dynatrace for a particular use case. It's just fabulous experience. And like I said, they fill up fast. So make sure get registered soon. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention was I said a couple of weeks ago, we made a big announcement about Grail. The Grail technology is a fundamental new way of us being able to store and analyze data that's part of the Dynatrace platform. The first initial iterations of Grail and what you're going to see from it are going to be focused specifically on use cases around logs and business analytics. Eventually, there'll be other use cases that will be added to the platform. But this is such an important piece and new technology for Dynatrace. What I recommend is come join us for an Ask Me Anything session. I'm going to be with a couple of other people, Rob John and Michael Taylor. We've got a session scheduled November 9th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please feel free to join us. We'll walk through a little bit about what this Grail technology really means. We'll walk through a couple of demonstrations, and we'll be open to answer any questions that you might have about it. So please join us for this Dynatrace Grail Ask Me Anything session on November 9th. And with that, it's time to get to the best part of getting to know Dynatrace. And that's when I'm going to be quiet now, and I'm going to hand things over to Brendan. So, Brendan, how have you been, my friend?
I've been well. Glad to be back.
All right.
Awesome.
So it's over to you. Why don't you walk us through a demonstration of Dynatrace? And folks, as Brendan gets started, as I've said before, please feel free to ask us questions. So whatever channel you're using, if you're watching us on YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitch or Twitter or Facebook, whatever it might be, type in a question and we'll do our very best to get those questions answered for you. And with that, Brendan, take it away.
Awesome. Can you see my screen okay?
We sure can.
Awesome. Yeah, so for those of you who haven't Dynatrace before, this is what we call the Smartscape topology. So what we're showing here is really all the interconnected applications and the dependencies that your application has. So what happens is when we install the one agent, it automatically discovers and injects itself into your application. So you get all of the infrastructure metrics like host, CPU, disk, all that great stuff. But then you don't have to go into your Apache config file and edit things. You don't have to add JVM arguments, stuff like that, adding IIS modules. So really installing that one agent is really an automated process, and we like to make it as quick as possible. Normally we can get them up and running within 5 minutes.
It's funny you're talking, Brendan. You're talking about the how easy it is to install the Dynatrace One agent. I like to joke sometimes that if you look at Dynatrace the wrong way, it tries installing an agent. That's how easy it is. But no, seriously, folks, it is so easy to deploy the agent. As Brendan mentioned, you can use Chef, Puppet, Ansible to automate the deployment of the agents. You can use the Dynatrace operator to deploy the agent out into your containerized environments. You can build the agent into your machine images. So when you spin up a new VM, the agent's automatically there. In that case, it requires zero touch. We've had customers that were able to deploy 19,000 agents in less than 3 hours. That's how easy it is to deploy these agents. So when it comes to getting your mean time to observability, that's something we can definitely help you with. So Brendan, I apologize I interrupted. Keep going, my friend.
No, those are great points, and really that is one of the value points of having Dynatrace. And almost more impressive than Jonesy's beard, not quite. But as we zoom in here, what you'll see is with all these connections, if I zoom into say one here, I'll click on it. So this was red, indicating that Dynatrace indicated there's an issue from the data that we collected. And from this service, you can actually see, okay, this web service is running on this Apache Tomcat process, and you can see the 4 different processes that would serve this web request from these specific 4 Linux hosts running in our US East AWS availability zone. So it really gives you an insight into where your application is, where the issue is, and taking the guesswork out of it. Because when we collect all this data, it's important to have context with it and be able to do something with that data. And that's really what Dynatrace does well here. It's taking all of the information that it's automatically gathering from your applications and from your environments and sorting those and letting you know, hey, something's abnormal. So as I switch over to this other tab here, what Dynatrace does is create these problem cards that really shows, what's operating out of, in an abnormal way. So I'll just focus on this point here and say, the current response time, 921 milliseconds, exceeds the auto-detected baseline of 295 milliseconds. So what Dynatrace is doing is you no longer have to set static thresholds. We're taking those and learning over a 7-day period what your normal running is. And as you can see here, Dynatrace automatically detected that. And so it's really, hands off, you have more important things to do. If something goes wrong, Dynatrace will let you know. So I'll take you through this problem card that really details and gives you that context of this data. So we can see here for our demo application, easytravel.com, there was a user action duration degradation, essentially meaning response time increase. And we can see it affected one application, which resulted or which composed of 10 services, underlying infrastructure of 2 different hosts there. And it actually affected 5 different SLOs that we've configured to say, hey, we have to meet this criteria. These are our SLOs or our SLAs. And it can tell you if you're breaching them and what your error budget is. If your downtime is only 2 hours a month, if you're breaching that, Dynatrace can help you find that. So uh, as we scroll down the page here, we can also look at the business impact analysis. So really getting into the number of effective users and seeing exactly who they are. So if I want to see which users were having an issue, I could click down into this and view the different sessions here that some have usernames in there, and we can help pull those out. You can see how long they visited the page and really get a view into your application from a front end perspective. Because what this is showing is they came onto the loading page, they clicked on login, they searched for a specific destination, and what they did all throughout their user journey. So this is really helping you understand your customer's experience and the times taken with that. Was it frustrating? Was it satisfying, tolerable with a longer search here? And your conversion goals. That's the checkered flag here. But you can always drill down and find more in Dynatrace, and that's the real great thing about it. So I'll close off this and head back to the overall problem card. But you can see here there's multiple points that you can drill down into to get more, not only business context, but technology context as well. And this is exactly where that technology context is. So you can see, as I said before, the response time increase, that's increased quite a lot. And on the right side is, my favorite thing about Dynatrace is the root cause and telling you exactly where the problem is. So it really takes out that guesswork. So based on the Davis AI, the underlying AI in Dynatrace, we have the check destination custom service being detected as the root cause of this issue. And it looks like that was actually due to a deployment event. As we look at the time, this was done at 2 in the morning, so perhaps there was a deployment scheduled for this morning. And we can actually integrate with things like ServiceNow and, as Jonesy mentioned earlier, Ansible, to really utilize and get the most out of Dynatrace. So what this is doing is saying, okay, there was a deployment event in ServiceNow, and that information was pushed into Dynatrace, so that understands it as well. And Dynatrace is talking back to ServiceNow to say, hey, there was actually an issue with this deployment. It's not acceptable. It's breaching our SLOs. And when that talks back, it actually runs a remediation to roll back that deployment. So whether this was, an automated deployment or something done by people awake at 2 a.m., the rollback is fairly easy. So, my favorite story is always how I was told, we had a deployment on the weekend and I was at a family barbecue and, it went wrong. It was just automatically rolled back because Dynatrace figured out a problem card and talked to their ITSM, which ran Ansible, and really the automated state of what Dynatrace can provide for you. So that's something really amazing that I love to highlight. And then underneath that, you're able to look specifically at the code level and look into this check destination service. But before I do that, I want to show the last thing that the problem card gives you, and it's called a visual resolution path. So what you're able to do is actually replay the problem right from the beginning. So if I hit the play button here, it'll start to light up like a Christmas tree. So I'll let this play for a few moments, and then I'll explain a bit. So if I pause here, what you're able to see is all the different components affected. And really, this shows the power of the Davis AI and the problem card. So what we're saying here is, yes, all of these components are affected, but really the one underlying root cause is the check destination service right here, which I could drill into. But with other tools, what you might find is you get alerts for all of these different ongoing components. There's 44 ongoing events and 13 different components. So you could be getting, as little as 13, but as many as 44 different alerts if it doesn't recognize that all of these are really connected and it's the same problem. It's not separate issues. And then you're able to scroll down and see exactly how each component was affected if you'd like to drill down more into it. So I love this view, and I'll let it play there and let it all turn green. But it really shows the evolution of your problem, and you no longer have to ask someone to recreate it. How did you get this to happen? Could you please send me the steps? You're able to see it all here. And then as it winds down, you'll see everything lighting up green, and everything's back to a normal state.
So, it's interesting, Brendan, you're going through this, and what always impresses me about this is, how in most organizations, what's happening is that monitoring that they are currently using is happening at so many different levels. Like, there's different tools that are being used to monitor the OS. There's a different set of tools that are being used to monitor your processes, different tooling that's being used to monitor your applications, different tools being used to monitor your web servers, different tools being used to monitor your external traffic, your real user traffic, your logs. And so ultimately you get over a half a dozen tools right there that I've talked about that are all completely unaware of each other. They exist within silos that are being used specifically by small teams. And the challenge with that is that in a war room scenario, everybody basically comes to the war room, and you got your network people, your database people, you got your operations people, your line of business people, your developers, and everybody's tools all have green lights, and yet the problem still exists. And one of the really interesting things about this visual resolution path is that it just shows you how the Dynatrace deterministic AI starts to stitch together the relationships between these entities and actually provide you, hey, here's the answer. And everything else that's lit up red, those are the symptoms of the problem. So very, very good. Awesome job there, Brendan. Keep going, man.
Yeah.
Keep going.
No, that was great. Thanks, Jonesy. Yeah.
And while you're doing that, Brendan, folks, if you do have questions, please feel free, fire them away.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to answer any questions. But as I come back here, the last thing I'll want to cover on the problem cards here is, since it was a response time degradation, and everything was rolled back, obviously you'll want to push out those new features that you were intending to, or push those fixes, whatever the deployment may have been. You can actually go down and analyze the response time degradation. So you can see exactly where the time is being taken. So the code execution looks like there's a little bit of suspension, but it's in microseconds rather than milliseconds. So really, if we focus on that code execution, you can then drill into the method hotspots and look exactly at your stack trace and any hotspots that may appear here. So developers being friendly with the code, they'd be able to say, oh, okay, yes, I see what's happening here. And even more on this level, if I go back to the service itself, so this will look at all of those code related requests. And you can see here, it's actually got a bunch of information attached to it as well. But if I click on, what's contributing to this problem, let's look at this journey service check destination. It's going to take me to this page here. And if I really zero in on this time frame, what I'll be able to do is actually drill into the pure paths, or rather the distributed traces. You likely know them as spans or traces, and look at the highest response time of those contributors. So I'll zoom into this specific time, and you'll see some increasing response times there, where before we were in milliseconds, now we're up to 2.5 seconds. And you can drill down into the transaction and see it as it crossed all the different tiers that we saw in that visual resolution path. So we're starting from this recommendations page, but really what is that calling? All of these underneath services that you can find the response time for, as well as the database calls. So you can see those here and get that information. Of course, some of it is obfuscated for security, but you can look at all the information that's collected here, as well as if it's, say, on Nginx or Apache, whatever it may be. If I click into this one, we capture metadata. This is where we could capture, specific variables that may be of use to you, or of use identifying customers, or identifying a certain transaction. But even more interesting, I don't believe it's set up currently for Apache, but what you could do is, if there's any logs associated with any of these calls, you could click on this button up here, View Logs for this trace, and it will take you to our logs viewer, and insert that trace ID, and you'd be able to see the logs specifically for that transaction and look at those errors, or look at the requests that were taking a long time. So if I just close this one off and load some up for an example, you'll see all the logs there coming into our Dynatrace environment, and there's quite a bit. There's a lot of good information in them. You're able to see which host it's on, right down to the process group and into the service itself. And really, Dynatrace is giving you everything interconnected. We want to see how we know things aren't operated in a silo basis. As Jonesy was saying, having all those different tools for logs, for security, for observability, bringing everything together and getting it in context and having it filterable is really the goal here. Yeah, and that's mostly what I want to show for today. Are there any questions?
So, Brendan, while we're waiting to see if anyone has any questions, there's a couple of
Mhm.
things that we can actually walk through that we
Sure.
don't often get a chance to walk through during these getting to know Dynatrace sessions. The
Mhm.
very first thing is, you know what? Let's go. Let's dare to be different, and let's go in and have a look at and walk us through VMware as an example. Tanzu VMware.
Sure.
And the reason I want to do this is that, VMware Tanzu type technology, this is effectively a virtualization hypervisor. This is where you run all your VMs. And the reason I want to walk through it is that, a lot of people are, obviously using virtualization within their environments. And so let's walk through an example here of just the types of things that you get to see with Dynatrace when we're looking at it from a point of view of VMware.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good view to look into, and all the different hypervisors and cloud providers, AWS, Azure, um, GCP as well. So what we're able to see and connect in there is really looking at all of the EXI hosts. So if I drill down into one, you're actually able to see a real depth of information. So you get your normal metrics like CPU, memory, disk, and if you click on anything in this infographic, of course, underneath it'll update, as it does with all the hosts. But you'll also get a breadth of information under the problems, if there's anything, a user action duration degradation, or any events that are going on as well. So you can actually see that a virtual machine was migrated, in Dynatrace, and we're pushing these events so they're available all in one place. Um, and if we scroll down and look at all these virtual machines, I'll show details. You get your CPU ready time, and I'll go into Easy Travel Demo 1. You're actually able to view more and look into those processes as well. So you're really able to drill down and get all that data in context. There's your logs, there's network module throttling active, all of these different events that may or may not, result in a problem, but at least you're aware of them. And then another cool feature that that also leads us to is actually what Jonesy was mentioning earlier on with the third-party vulnerabilities. So we're actually able to see the different vulnerabilities that may be running in your environment. So if I click on this here as well, it will sort it out. So it looks like we've gotten 5 muted, but we have 5 critical, 119 high, and you're able to really segregate out what's important to you. So we have this Davis security score, which takes into account multiple different things, such as remote code execution, is there public internet exposure. So say if I click into, let's take SQL injection. So in this one, there is public internet exposure. There's data assets that can be queried and captured, and there's also vulnerable functions that are in use. So, with Log4j or even the most recent Apache one, you want to make sure that you're constantly keeping those libraries and functions out of use if you're not up to date. So you can see where a traditional scanning tool, if you're scanning every week on a Monday and then deployment is on a Wednesday, what if oh yeah, my code is safe, but then all of a sudden there's a vulnerable function that you accidentally used and you're not aware right away. This is something that Dynatrace can help with, because really we're in the code level and we're constantly monitoring for these vulnerabilities. And
And
as you, oh yeah,
no,
go
I
ahead,
was just
Jonesy.
going to say, and I think you were about to do it there, Brendan. As you scroll down into the vulnerability details here, not only does it provide you information about the vulnerability, which is what you're highlighting right now, and how we get this feed from SNCC, you can actually see the relationships and the dependencies. And so, how do we know a process is exposed to the internet? How do we know that a process that has a vulnerability has sensitive data assets in range? It all comes back to that entity model, that smartscape that we showed you before, right? If not for that smartscape and our understanding of the relationships between these entities, then we wouldn't be able to provide you these types of answers. And that's one of the really unique things about what Dynatrace does when it comes to vulnerability scanning and basically understanding if a dependency is in range of a potential attack. So great stuff. Great stuff there, Brendan. Why don't we, if there's no more questions at the moment, let's, let's walk through, again, let's flip the switch and change things up. And let's walk through an example of a service, and let's walk through maybe some pure paths and service flows.
Yeah, for sure. So if I come under here and look at the services, so this is the code level of the applications, and what I'll do is I'll actually open up my time frame a bit more here and set it to last 6 hours. So it's focusing on that problem there before. And what I'll do is sort by the number of requests. So you can see there's quite a bit on this hipster shop product catalog service. So if I drill into that more, you'll actually see we have Kubernetes tags and information that is coming in through here. So you get all of that, into Dynatrace as well. And looking into those requests, you can see the response time, the failure rate, if there are any 400 or 500 errors, the CPU, and the throughput as well. So as I go down, there's 2 specific requests that is being made in here, and what we can see is a bunch of different options. So if I go into the service flow, for example, what you're able to see, oh, not for this one, I guess. If I go back to here, yeah, so it's reaching out to 0 services here. You can actually see the 2 services calling it in the front. So checkout service and Fred's front. So say I go to this checkout service, just so we have a bit more full service flow there, and look at it here. So really what this view is going to do is something similar to the visual resolution path, but really looking at the code level. So it's saying, okay, it comes into this checkout service, and it could go one of 3 ways, or I guess 8 ways. So it has a bunch of different services under here, but the highest contributor that's going to is actually the shipping service here. And if you want to look into any of these pure paths, you definitely could. But this is really good for understanding how your application, navigates its code, and which functions are calling each other, and really looking at the dependencies of your application.
So we do a really good job of coming up with names that people might not be familiar with. A good example of that is a pure path.
Yes.
So Brendan, how would you describe a pure path?
So it's traditionally it's called traces and spans, but really it's the transaction that's being made under your application. So as we showed before, if I view distributed traces here, just to get a visual of it, it's going to look at all the different calls that are made at that code level. So you can see a pure path technology at the top here. But if I go into, say, this place order, just to take the first one, this is really your transaction at the code level. And so you can see it's checking out, they're placing the order, and then all these calls are made underneath it. And what you're able to see is, okay, this send order confirmation, that's taking the longest time now. Our time frame scale is quite short here, but say, if this was in seconds, obviously you'd want to look into this more. And you could, looking at the logs or looking at, the code level and the information that we have here, you'd be able to see exactly where the time is being taken. So,
So
yeah.
what's super interesting about this, and the reason that I wanted you to go into this, Brendan, is that in the industry, obviously there is a big push around open source approaches to tracing, and open telemetry is definitely the
Oh,
one
yeah.
that everyone talks about. And so when you are looking at a collection of spans and traces, part of the challenge that a lot of organizations have is what happens in a scenario where your application is highly distributed, and part of the code is running as let's just say it's running as in a containerized type environment, but then it makes a call off to another system that's more monolithic, and it's something that's been existing for a number of years, and it's more of a traditional Java stack. um, how do you tie all that together using open telemetry? It can cause a lot of challenges. And what's really unique about the pure path approach is that all of those spans and traces are collected together. And, in certain cases, some of that span information might be coming from, um, some of the spans might be coming from an open telemetry source. In other cases, it might be coming from the Dynatrace One agent. And the great thing about Dynatrace is that we can combine all of this together. I see we got a question in here. How can we extract logs for the example that we're looking at right now? Thank you very much for that question. And Brendan, I think we've got an answer for that. It's right there on the screen in blue.
Yeah. So if we want to, we could view logs for this trace. So if I click on that there, I don't believe we're capturing any for this currently. But what
But
we
let's go
could
find
do,
another example where we
yeah,
where we do have some.
let's see here.
So effectively with Dynatrace, what you can do is there are features that you can turn on that allow us to basically take that Dynatrace header information and then combine it with a trace ID that can be written out into a log. And so what that basically allows us to do is it allows us to flip back and forth between the log and the traces and tie them in together. So what do we got here? We got an
Yeah.
example.
So I
Yeah.
believe this one we're injecting logs into. And
Okay.
so if I just take, say, get ads here and look at the distributed traces, and we'll take the highest response time there, 98 milliseconds. Not too long, but highest there. So really clicking on this one, and you could actually view the logs when you drill down into it here as well. And you can look at it into the process level and really get all of that deep information right here. Um, and again, you could also, if I exit out of this page, because I drilled specifically into that one span in this trace, if I want to view logs for this trace, I could click it there, and it would give me the same details, on a different page here. So, getting all the information that's in the log and any attributes, looking at, the host that it's on, the log that it was generated in, and really all identifying it and associating it with your Kubernetes and anything else that might be related to it.
And so when you're using Dynatrace in a completely full stack fashion, and we use the term full stack, it's a essentially a mode that Dynatrace operates in, where we are capturing everything from the user's session within their browser to all of the transactions, all the way to the back end. When you use Dynatrace in a full stack fashion and you enable the logging, you can actually go from a log line like this, and you would be able to say, show me the trace for that. But also, it's grayed out in this case because this example is not turned on. But if it is turned on, you could actually go directly to that user session that Brendan was showing you earlier on. So when we were looking at that user session, you can effectively go from the user session to a trace to the log, and it's all there for you. And you're just clicking on buttons to go there. You're not doing complicated searches within your logs. It makes things so much simpler for a developer to be able to understand, hey, here's a user doing something within their browser. Here's the resultant traces that were generated. Here are the resulting logs that were recorded, and it's all there for you. It's just a ridiculously powerful way of being able to understand exactly what's going on from an end-to-end perspective. Let's see, what else do we do here? We got 13 minutes. Other questions, folks? Feel free to bring those in. Brendan, what do you feel like showing in the interim? What didn't we talk about yet?
Let's see. So the cloud automation piece, I could cover that.
Yeah, let's do
I
that.
always find
Yeah.
that really cool.
Yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
I know we talked about service level objectives, and of course you can put that in there as well. But if I click on releases, oh, see another question for logs. Do we want to cover that off before moving on?
Sure, let's do that before we drill into this one. So, yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for for queuing that one up for us. Definitely. So the whole Grail storage component is all cloud-based. So it doesn't require any storage on your side. It's all handled by us. And what's going to happen is you'll actually be given, from a storage perspective, you'll be given the option. You will be able to store your logs with us for 30 days, 1 year, or 3 years. And this is all hot storage. So there is no glacier going on. There's no cold storage model with Dynatrace. So unlike other logging solutions that are out there, you don't have this concept with Dynatrace of hot storage versus cold storage versus a glacier. What's happening is all of that data that's being stored can be considered to be hot. So you can basically do a query against up to 3 years worth of data. And that's going to happen, in a very, very fast, efficient fashion. You're not going to have to wait for that data to get rehydrated. You're not going to have to move that data from your cold storage to your hot storage to actually execute the queries. What does that do? It changes the game for organizations that are relying on the logs to be able to do that sort of forensic auditing, to be able to look back in time to find information that's been stored away. And so it's from our standpoint, it's an important differentiator. And thank you very much for that question. It is all going to be handled by storage that is handled by us, and it's all SaaS driven. So you don't have to provide any storage on your end. Great question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, great one. Awesome.
All right,
And with
let's keep
that,
going.
yeah, I'll lead into the releases here. So what you can actually do is connect Dynatrace, with your GitHub, or whatever release inventory you're using. So, say if I take this first one here, just as an example, you can attach your deployments to Dynatrace, and this would help with release validation. in ensuring that your releases are in line with your SLOs and everything that you're expecting. If there's any tracked issues, you could check the configuration on GitHub as well. And of course, looking at your deployments. So the problem card that we looked at earlier, what Dynatrace is going to do is it's going to hook into your GitHub and your release pipeline and really make sure that your code is performing as it should be. And it really helps you release efficient code faster. So, you don't want to push anything to production that might have, performance degradation increases or failures or cause a user, not to be able to use your services. If I visit a website and it's not loading for 5 seconds, I usually close it off. I'm very impatient. So, this is really helping out with those. And you can see it's got the specific features and all that great information from GitHub as well. So I love showing this page, and you can actually instrument something we call quality gates as well, which is really taking those SLOs that you have and saying, okay, these requests cannot breach this threshold, and it will ensure as you're going through your testing pipeline or your CI/CD pipeline that you're meeting those standards that you've set for yourself or others have for you. So really great stuff. Yeah.
Right on. So we've got we're almost near the top of the hour. If there's other questions, feel free to fire them at us, folks. But if there aren't any questions, then let's wrap things up. So you know what? As a reminder, folks, these getting to know Dynatrace sessions, that what makes them so useful and so interesting are your questions. So please, thank you for the questions that you did ask, and in future sessions, please feel free to come armed with questions that you might want to bounce off us. A couple of closing comments and notes, and that would be, as I mentioned, November 9th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be doing an Ask Me Anything session focused specifically on the Dynatrace Grail technology. That's a part of the platform that we were talking about. And then, come back in a couple of weeks for another session of getting to know Dynatrace. It looks like, oh, wait. We got a question. So, previously based on SLOs calling an Ansible playbook to revert to stable release, dream of every SE. Yeah, no, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
So, the scenario that, thank you for that comment.
Mhm.
The scenario that Brendan walked us through is, a good other way of describing it is that Dynatrace effectively becomes a quality gate, right? So, when we use the term quality gate, it is, we are analyzing, here's a build, and I'm going to move it from stage 1 to stage 2. And you know what? As a matter of fact, let me just do this for a second. I'm going to share my screen again. So let me just share my screen and let's go into a quick little dashboard to sort of illustrate this. So I've got this cloud dashboard that is related to this cloud automation dashboard. And just, to sort of illustrate, where this kind of plays. Here is an example that if I was using Dynatrace as a automated quality gate, I'm going to integrate it in with my pipelines. That means that my build pipeline that might exist in, say, my Azure DevOps scenario or tool right here, I'm tracking all of my different YAML files that I'm using as part of my build. But if I go back into this dashboard here, I can also see, in this case, this is my deployment schedule. Here I've got it linked into things like, my different SLOs that we're using. Here I've got it linked into my automated load testing, and I'm looking at my test results. So all of that information that you're using and generating as you are, pushing a build from stage 1 to stage 2, Dynatrace is analyzing that. You can create a set of rules that basically say, this is a good build, let it through. This is a bad build, push it back. When you push it back, you're giving developers all sorts of details in terms of where are those failed requests. You're giving them all sorts of information and answers as to why that build didn't actually make its way from stage 1 to stage 2. What's the effect of this? The effect of this is that we can drive innovation faster. You can create builds of better quality and reduce the number of errors that are making their way into production. And you can do this in a very automated fashion. And so, thank you for that comment. And Brendan, thank you very much for walking us through that example. It's a really interesting discussion point about how Dynatrace can be used to help organizations shift left. But then also remember, Dynatrace can help organizations shift right as well, because while this data is being generated from my dev pipeline, I'm always going to have data that can come into Dynatrace coming from the from your production system as well. All right, folks. So we're near the top of the hour. I'm going to close it out. And with that, join us in a couple of weeks for another session of getting to know Dynatrace. It's been our pleasure to walk through this demonstration today with you. Thank you very much, Brendan. Really appreciate it. You did a great
Thanks for
job.
having me.
And folks, thank you very much for the questions. And with that, we'll call it a week. So take care, folks, and we'll see you next time on Getting to Know Dynatrace.